This is a little PowerPoint about thermoregulation. So that's one of the homeostatic mechanisms of your body. You remember homeostasis from GCSE. It hasn't changed. Remember, homeostasis is about controlling the internal environment despite any changes. So it's about keeping everything within very narrow ranges to maintain sort of the tissue fluid composition. So that's things such as the level of water, level of salt, level of sugar, heat, all those sorts of things, homeostatic mechanisms. This is thermoregulation, so we're looking at the control of body temperature here. So this is what we're going to cover, how it's transferred to and from the body, how heat energy is, what's the role of the hypothalamus in this, what are the exact mechanisms of thermoregulation, and basically how even though you may exercise and generate excess body heat, you keep your core within a narrow range when you're exercising. So, first things first, how energy is transferred to and from the body. Now, this is a bit of revision. You should remember this from your GCSE, so I'm going to let you focus on your own, then we'll go through it. But it's things such as conduction, convection, radiation, and evaporation. You should remember these from GCSE. Kind of a bit of a description of what they are, and then kind of how it applies to humans, really. So, do that now. Okay, so all the answers are going to come out in one big hit. So conduction. So conduction is contact. So it's like sitting on a cold step, putting a cold flannel on your forehead. It's car seat warmers, which I happen to love, or leaning against a rad. So it's when basically heat moves to a cooler area. Okay, that's conduction. Convection. Convection is about sort of wind, movement of particles, basically. And you may remember the convection tube and potassium permanganate from GCSE physics, when you drop some in and lit a candle underneath and the purple transferred around the convection tube. You may not remember that. Look it up if you want to. But basically, heat is transferred as those particles move about. Okay, so think of things like wind, the wind chill factor, or a fan, or something along those lines. Radiation, so that's just heat energy, it's a form of electromagnetic spectrum, isn't it? And it's the rays of your heat energy. Think about when you go for a run, and you can almost physically feel the heat coming off your face where you're hot. So an evaporation is the big one for us humans. It's how most of our heat is lost, and you've all experienced it. We're talking about sweating here, is the main way. Also, remember when you exhale, I'm sure you've all seen your breath on a cold morning. So basically, the amount of heat energy used to convert liquid into a vapour is immense, and it's called the latent heat of vaporisation. And it's one of the main ways that you get rid of your excess body heat. Okay, so that's that. Well, the hypothalamus, area of the brain, just sitting there, look, just above the brainstem there. Two centres, easily named heat loss, heat gain, which is quite convenient, I always feel. For your exam board, you need to know about two sets of receptors. One set is actually the hypothalamus itself, some in there, and also on your skin, because obviously you want to know that it's cold outside before your blood starts to get cold. So your skin is feeding in ambient outside temperature. But you have receptors in your blood vessels and things as well. But it's your hypothalamus in the brain, the thermoregulatory centre, that controls the regulation of your body temperature, simulating either the heat loss part when you need to lose heat because you're hot, or the heat gain where you need to maintain your body heat basically and hang on to it, and when you're cold, based on the information fed in from those receptors. Now, here is a negative feedback loop for thermoregulation. Hopefully from GCSE you remember that vast majority of homeostatic mechanisms in the body work on a negative feedback loop. That is, something changes, there's a change from the norm, and then there are corrective mechanisms to bring things back to the norm. Okay, that's what negative feedback is. Change from the norm and things are brought back to the norm again. As opposed to a positive where there is a change from the norm and then mechanisms push it further away from the norm. I'm thinking here the most common one to give an example is childbirth. And in that, it is the stretching of the cervix releases oxytocin, which causes the uterus to contract, which stretches the cervix, which releases more oxytocin, and it's kind of an ongoing loop. Because the uterus is contracting, the cervix is opening more so that you can have the birth of the baby, and that keeps happening until it stretches enough to give birth. But we are talking about negative. So, in terms of thermoregulation, we have our set point. Remember, body temperature is between 36.5 to 37.5, depending on who you are. We've all got a slightly different body temperature, but it never goes outside that very narrow range. then something will happen. The temperature inside you will rise. It could be that you're exercising. It could be that it's a hot, sunny day. But this is detected by those receptors in your skin and your hypothalamus. They feed information straight to the heat loss center in the hypothalamus, okay? And the hypothalamus causes your effectors to react, or the mechanisms inside your body to lose heat, such as sweating, for instance. Temperature begins to fall. You go back to your set point again. Negative feedback, okay? Absence of the message stops any actions because everything's back to normal. There's no longer a stimulus, so there's nothing of this happening. And then the other way, temperature falls, so perhaps it's a cold day outside. Again, it's detected by receptors which feed information from the hypothalamus and the skin into the brain. We have the heat gain centers this time, mechanisms to retain body heat. So you've all been cold, you've all shivered. That's one way of generating body heat there. This causes your internal temperature to rise and you go back to the norm again. Okay, you go back to 37 degrees. So that's your negative feedback loop for thermoregulation there. Okay, so what are these actual mechanisms? So what I want from you now to think, you've all experienced this, you've all been cold, you've all been hot. So what happens when you're cold and what happens when you're hot, please? There's an increase in your body temperature goes up, your heat loss center has been stimulated. How do you cool down? That's what I want in this box here, how you cool down. You've all done it, you've experienced it yourself. And conversely, the body temperature is decreased, so your heat gain center has been stimulated and you need to increase your body temperature. What happens when you're cold? How do you hang on to that body heat? How do you generate more? So fill those in. Okay, so it's going to come out in one big hit. If you want to cool down, you sweat more. Okay, so we've all experienced sweating. You release the sweat onto your skin, it evaporates off, taking the heat with it. Main way you sweat. Sweat pours all over your body. If it's like a hairy mammal, such as a dog, you'll be aware they pant, and they've got little sweat in the pads of their feet. They sweat through their feet. But sweating. Vasodilation we're going to come back to, but that is when the arterioles close to the surface of the skin dilate. Please be careful and don't write about capillaries and arteries moving towards the surface of the skin. They don't. Hair erector muscles relax, so that's the hairs on your arms and your legs, and all your little hairs all over your body. There are muscles that will contract and pull them up and relax and make them lay flat. Your liver reduces the metabolic rate, so if your metabolic rate goes down, you're having a slower rate of chemical reactions in your body, so you're generating less waste heat. Skeletal muscles relax, in other words, you don't shiver, more to the point, you don't shiver. And there are behavioural adaptations, so on hot days, generally, you don't really want to move about too much. You might seek out shade, you might remove some clothing, you might seek cool water, cool drinks, those sorts of things, behavioural things that we do. To cool us down. And then the other way is if the body temperature goes down, so you're cold. So you've stimulated your heat gain center and you want to increase your body temperature. So when you're cold, you don't sweat, or you sweat less, should I say. So you reduce the amount that you sweat, therefore you reduce evaporation. You have vasoconstriction. This time the arterioles close to the surface of the skin constrict, and we'll look again at what happens there in a moment. The hair erector muscles contract and pull all the hairs over your body. They begin to stand up. Now, I am aware that because we're not hairy mammals, this is not such a massive use to us, I suppose. But the idea is that if the hair stands up, you can trap a layer of warm air next to the skin. Helps insulate you. It's the same idea behind wearing layers of clothing. You can trap warm air between the layers. Shivering, so that's your skeletal muscles contracting, involuntary contracting, and it's very difficult to stop yourself shivering. By your muscles continually contracting and relaxing, you are increasing your respiratory rate in those muscle cells, and so they are increasing the amount of respiration that occurs, and they're going to increase the amount of heat they generate, which can then be transferred around the body by your blood. Liver increases the metabolic rate, so if you in a cold snap perhaps, or live in a cold environment, you will increase the rate at which your metabolic reactions occur in your body and therefore generate extra energy that way, heat energy. Behavioural adaptations in the cold weather. You'll put on more clothing, you probably put a hat and some gloves on, you probably seek shelter, you will want to drink warm drinks. Think about, dogs and cats when they're cold, if you've got one, they'll curl up and reduce their surface area, they may huddle and cuddle, those sorts of things, behavioural adaptations. Okay, and that's them all there. Okay, now, This is your skin, and the reason I'm showing you a diagram of your skin is not because your exam board wants you to be able to label one up as an A01 skill. It's just because I don't know how aware you are of the structure of the skin and kind of where everything is and how it all relates. Because I want to talk to you about vasoconstriction and vasodilation. So you're going to have basically obviously a blood supply to your skin, and you've got your artery, and they will come down into arterioles, and then they'll go up into capillaries. Okay, these will also feed the hairs in your skin, and each hair will have its own little erector muscle, which is supplied obviously by its nerve, the effector nerve, to enable it to contract and relax, stand up, lie down. You're going to have a sweat gland there, and you're also going to have some thermoreceptors or temperature receptors in your skin. Okay. This is the layer of your skin. Now, it's this bit here that's interesting, particularly in terms of this bit here called the shunt vessel. And this is the bit that either constricts or dilates, and it basically controls the flow of blood up to the surface of the skin. Okay, remember, these are not moving up and moving down. That's not what happens. They either widen or constrict, and the shunt either widens or constricts, and either allows more blood or less blood to flow to the skin. So we've got a couple of diagrams here. Vasoconstriction. In vasoconstriction, what happens is the shunt dilates. So as blood arrives in the capillaries and goes, as blood arrives in the arteries and goes therefore to the arterioles, that shunt will dilate and blood will bypass the capillaries at the surface of the skin. Okay, so therefore arteriole has constricted. There is less blood flowing up here to the capillaries, so less heat is lost via radiation. Okay, so you're reducing the blood flow to the skin by dilating that shunt. Okay. Vasodilation, the reverse happens. The shunt constricts, so it narrows. So more blood is going to go up to the surface, up to these surface capillaries here. The arterioles have relaxed to allow more blood. So there's more blood flowing to the surface of the skin because the shunt is constricted. And if you've got more blood up there, it allows you to lose more heat via radiation. So that's vasoconstriction and vasodilation. So in vasoconstriction, the shunt dilates, where in vasodilation, the shunt constricts. Okay, that's the thing to remember. Now, you need to be able to link all this to what happens during exercise. And a common way for your example to ask you to do that is to give you a graph of some sort. There's a very simple graph here. We have body temperature here, as you can see it's ranging from 36.6 up to 38. We've got time in minutes across the bottom. And we can see the person's at rest here. Now, they're exercising. You can see their VO max has increased. It means they're exercising harder, 40% here, 60% here. Their intensity has increased, so they're exercising harder. And then they're in their recovery period here, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15, 20 into recovery, exercising here for 5, 20. So it's in 20-minute sections, basically. Resting, gentle exercise, moderate exercise, recovery. Although I suppose 60% is a bit more than moderate, but you know what I mean. Okay, so the task asks you to describe and explain. Remember, describe is say what you see. What is the graph doing? Explain why is it doing that. So if we're going to, so I want you to have a go at that first. Describe the graph and then explain why it looks that way. So, say what you see, describe. So at rest, I would argue that between 37.2 and 37 is relatively constant. His body temperature, not plateaued, but it's, relatively constant. As soon as he begins exercising here, as exercise begins, and we can see gentle muscles, gentlish exercise here, the body temperature begins to increase, and as he begins to increase the intensity of his exercise, the temperature increases. So the harder he works, the higher the temperature goes. Until he's exercising after 20 minutes, he hits his peak, and then the recovery starts, and he or she stop exercising, so the rate of exercise decreases because they're at rest, and so therefore the body temperature decreases because they're at rest. It doesn't immediately return to normal. It's going to take time for you to get rid of all the excess heat in your body, so it's going to take a gradual decrease. It won't go bang back to normal as soon as you stop, like breathing, right? It's going to take time. So it remains more or less constant. Begins exercising, it begins to increase as the exercise increases, and then once the rest period, the body temperature begins to decrease again. Why is that? Well, why does your body temperature increase when you exercise is what the question is asking you. And the reason it increases when you're exercising is because respiration increases, the rate of it. The more you respire, the more heat you produce. You're respiring more because your muscles are contracting more, and therefore they need more energy to allow them to contract, so you need to respire more. Don't confuse respiring and breathing. Remember, breathing is ventilation. Respiration is the release of energy. Okay, and so you get the gradual decrease once recovery period, and it gradually takes time to remove all that excess heat from the muscles. Okay, so that's why it gradually decreases. How is it controlled? Well, it's a negative feedback loop. So there will be a stimulus, there will be something to detect the stimulus, there'll be something to sort of coordinate that, and something to, you know, to the effectors that bring about the response. So what I want now is to have a think about what those are, what stimulus receptor coordinator effectors are in terms of thermoregulation negative feedback loop. And we'll go through. Stimulus, well, that's temperature or change in temperature. Whether it goes up, whether it goes down, stimulus is a change. Okay, and that is detected by the receptors, those thermoreceptors in the skin, blood vessels, and the same in your hypothalamus, remember. The coordinator is the brain, the hypothalamus in particular. And then your effectors, these are things like your skeletal muscles that will cause shivering if you're cold. The erector pili muscles that will raise the hairs if need be. No, where's my vasoconstriction, vasodilation? Apologies for that. Oh, no. Well, it's also going to be vasoconstriction and vasodilation there. And then the last thing here is just a little diagram I quite like that I'm sharing with you. I don't know where it came from, so I can't credit it, but it shows you the information from the thermoreceptors is being fed into the hypothalamus there. And then based on that, these are all your effectors along here. So you've got the smooth muscles in your arterioles that are causing that dilation, constriction, working that shunt. You've got your sweat glands either increasing or decreasing the amount of sweat. You've got your erector pili muscles in the skin making the head stand up or lie flat. You've got our skeletal muscles that are causing shivering or not, depending. And then we didn't really mention this because it's not, on your spec so much, but adrenal and thyroid glands, they can increase and decrease your metabolic rate as need be. Okay, and that's thermoregulation.